So when we think of New Year's Eve, we think of parties, staying up late, counting down the seconds to midnight. And I don't know about you, but I always think about those really irritating noisemakers that sound something like a cross between a kazoo and a fussy baby pterodactyl. You want a demonstration? I brought one with me. So it sounds like this. More on that later. On Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, things are very different. We attend services, we pray, and while we might go to fun gatherings with family and friends, they're a far cry from the late-night bashes of the winter. Rosh Hashanah and the secular New Year both mark the beginning of their respective calendars, and they do share another important similarity. That is, we use both of these times to look back on our year and to look ahead to the new one just beginning. And we look within ourselves, too, and ask, how did we do this past year? Could we have done better? And we begin to find the answers to these questions, and we make resolutions. We try to set out a plan to make a better life, a better year. Now, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, is not actually called Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. In fact, when God speaks to Moses about this holy day, there's no mention of it as the new year at all. Now, confusingly, the Torah says this holiday occurs on the first day of the 7th month. And scholars still don't know exactly why this became the Jewish New Year and not Passover, which occurs in Nisan, what the Torah calls the first month. So before we take a look at why, let's go back to those noisemakers we blow on New Year's Eve, and I promise I won't blow it again. When we hear that sound, and especially when we're not expecting it, it can be quite jarring and irritating, especially when you have 3 kids blowing them all around you. But, as evidenced by that, the people blowing it sure are having lots of fun. Well, the Jewish New Year, of course, has its own noisemaker, the Shofar, but it evokes something very different from the frivolity and the carefree joy of the fussy baby pterodactyl kazoo. To understand what these feelings are and why, we look back at how the shofar was originally used. Way back in a time before cell phones and internet and PA systems, the shofar was the means of communication, but not a casual correspondence. The shofar was reserved for the most urgent and holy times of the people's lives. One of its earliest functions was to call and gather the troops for battle. Imagine hearing this sound. You're a soldier. You run to grab your weapons and armor, knowing that this could be your last battle. Or you're a parent. You hear the sound and you scramble to find shelter for your children. The immediate sensation following the blast of the shofar must have been prompted by a surge of adrenaline, the activation of the fight or flight response. The shofar called the people into life or death action. And this is exactly what it meant for the people to hear the shofar sounded on the day of remembrance on Rosh Hashanah. Back then, the people felt the urgency of the shofar's call because on this day of holiness and remembrance, the stakes were just as high for the people as if they were preparing for battle. Would they do things which would continue them on a path of their own destruction? Or would they see and recognize their flaws and hubris and replace them with better habits to benefit everyone around them? Today, it's a lot harder to hear the call and to feel this urgency because we don't live in a world of shofar calls. We no longer live in a world where everyone accepts that God plays a crucial role in our collective fate. But that doesn't make the sound of the shofar any less urgent. We come here to the sanctuary and watching online because we know the consequences of choosing blessings over curses, life over death. We know that we must use these Elul days leading up to Rosh Hashanah to find true introspection and purpose and to think deeply on what we've been doing. Are we destroying our planet? Or are we reversing the effects of our human industry and overconsumption? Are we widening the rift between privileged and underprivileged? Or will we remember what God warned us so long ago not to forget? The strangers, the orphans, those who are struggling in your midst because you yourselves were in that same position. Will we gather the strength to turn things around? Maybe the answer is in figuring out the conundrum of when this Jewish New Year really ought to occur. On Rosh Hashanah in Tishrei, or during Passover in the so-called first month, Nisan. Turns out we find a breakthrough explanation from the Ramban, a 13th century scholar. He says that the seventh month mentioned in the Torah is only called the seventh because the counting of the months in the Torah is for us, not for God. Here's the explanation. We were freed from a life of slavery in Egypt in what the Torah calls the first month. And we celebrate our freedom every year during Passover in Nisan. This is the first month for us as a free people. So when we learn that the Day of Remembrance happens in the seventh month, it means that it's the seventh month for us after becoming free. And it also means that these two events, the New Year and our freedom from slavery, are linked together in holiness. What did God do on the seventh day? God rested after creating the world. What did the Israelites do in the seventh month after their liberation? They celebrated the creation of the world during the first day of remembrance. When we hear the call of the shofar, we're reminded that our actions are not frivolous things. Rather, they pave the ways of two possible outcomes, our destruction or our flourishing. When we hear the shofar, let us be stirred to action. Let's look deeply within ourselves. Let's think hard about what we've been doing, and let's make those resolutions together so that we can not only repair what we have damaged and hurt, but also build a world where we can all live in blessing. Tekiah.